Pat Smith. She's the president of Lyme Disease Association. She's going to speak what and where they are, what is new for 2018. Pat has been instrumental in everything going on that I've done and what's happening for us on the island and also in the nation. She's been doing this for 37 years, am I correct? 35 years. I don't want to make her any older. It's 35 years. But it's 35 years of information and still going forward, still changing, still evolving. And for me, that's the most important part. It's yesterday, it's today, and it's what we're going to get done for tomorrow. Pat Smith.
Good afternoon. Oh, still on? Okay. You know what? I'll probably take it out. Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope that I can add something useful to your knowledge. This will not just be about Lyme disease, because I don't think people understand the numbers of diseases that right here we are facing. And everyone needs to know about it, and hopefully I'll shed a little bit of light on that today. So we're the National Nonprofit Lyme Disease Association. We've been in existence 27 years. We raise money for research, education, prevention, and patient support. And because we don't use employees, we use volunteers, 98% of our funds go directly to programs. And on that note, what else is on here that you need to know about? Basically, we have a partnership with about 45 organizations, and Bob and the Lyme Society and Paula Jackson-Jones here from Mid-Coast, Maine are part of that umbrella organization, and we all work together across the country to try to get something done about the epidemic that we are now facing. Now, the LDA to date has 45 journal articles. What does that mean? Well, scientific publications of research that we have funded have appeared in 45 journals to date, which is really good, because if you fund research and it doesn't get published, then no one else can build on that. So it has to be published. So we have a pretty good track record of doing that. And we have researchers from across the country that we have funded over time. We also partnered with our Connecticut Lyme organization and endowed the Columbia Lyme Disease Research Center in New York City. And of course, you heard Director Dr. Brian Fallon speaking today. And our organization has funding projects in various stages, from North Carolina Veterinary Medical with Bartonella, University of Toledo on Powassan virus, Rutgers University sequencing, ticks, Georgia Southern University, Shenandoah University, Kendall County, Illinois Health Department. We helped them determine what was in their ticks, and of course Columbia through various projects. Now, we also partner with Columbia on a conference every year. It's called a CME conference, Continuing Medical Education, and basically it's geared for physicians and researchers, but the public is permitted to register. This year's conference will be in Rhode Island in October. And we're very excited about that. And we have some of the speakers here, but you'll see there'll be 20 speakers, and they are offered CME credits from Columbia University, which is very good for doctors because they're very hard to come by. They're very stringent. We also give grant awards to other organizations. We gave a small grant to the Lyme Society for their conference here today, and we've given it to organizations across the country. We have Lyme Aid for Kids program with author Amy Tan. In case you didn't know, Amy Tan herself is a neurologic Lyme patient, and it interfered at times with her ability in her career, and she helped us initiate Lyme Aid for Kids, and to date we've given, I don't know, close to $350,000 out for children to try to get them started, either getting diagnosed or begin treatment. Also, I don't know how many people know that Meg Cabot, the Princess Diaries, she also has Lyme disease, and we worked with Meg and Amy and Jordan Fisher-Smith, if you know him, all authors. LDA has a lot of material. Some of it we have back on our table. You can also order it through our website. And we now have available, we've given the books out for free. It's a great background in history. Our Lyme disease update, science, policy, and law. We now have it on the website as an ebook for free. You can download it. We also have educational modules that you can run from the website if you're into scouting, or the schools can use it. And it's all about ticks and what to do for prevention. We also have a video, Tick Learning and Education for Schools, and that's also free on our website. So moving along, Lyme disease is found in over 80 countries worldwide now. And we do have a list on our website of countries where that we've been able to do research on the net to find out, because it's very hard to find out where it is. So we don't guarantee these are all admitting that they have Lyme, but the research seems to support that, and they are on our website if you're interested. So, can we escape ticks? Well, first of all, I will tell you that the ticks you see there are actually called Ixodes uriae, and they're seabird ticks. And guess where they're found? They're found down around Antarctica. And these ticks are carrying viruses and bacteria that are infecting penguins down there. And basically the bottom line is, this is a quote, "The zoonosis Lyme disease is caused by the spirochete Borrelia burgdorferi, which is carried by seabirds, transmitted by the Ixodes ticks. It has been found through DNA analysis in ticks on the Campbell Islands and Isle Crozet. King penguins on the Isle Crozet have antibodies to Borrelia burgdorferi." So what does that mean? That means that those penguins were exposed, folks, to the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. It's pretty scary stuff. So this is a penguin rookery on Macquarie Island down between New Zealand and Antarctica. And I show it because, first of all, I felt very sorry for the penguins when I found this out. And I liked this picture. I thought it showed you, gives you a picture of these penguins and so on. And I had to get permission to use this, and I contacted the person, and she was a nurse, and it turns out she was in Australia, and she said to me, first thing, well, yeah, but why would you want to use a picture of a penguin rookery, my picture, in a Lyme disease lecture? And I said, well, because Lyme disease is everywhere, and apparently it's in these penguins. And she said, oh, I don't have to worry, now she's a nurse, because we don't have it in Australia. And I said to her, well, I really hate to tell you this and burst your bubble, but you do. Your government doesn't want to have it, but it is there. And about 6 months later, she wrote me an email, and she said, I couldn't believe it. I was walking down the street in my hometown in Australia, and there in a window was a sign that said, Lyme disease support group meeting. So you see, folks, that's how we pass the message around. She probably would have never noticed that if I hadn't triggered that in her, that yes, indeed, you have Lyme disease in Australia. So this is a map of Europe, in case you're wondering, and you're going to take a trip there, and I've heard people tell me, well, we don't have to worry when we go over there. Well, I hate to tell you, but those red areas are basically all established tick populations in Europe, different ticks, but they carry and transmit Lyme disease. So what about in the United States? This is our map from Lyme Disease Association. You can always download and you print these for free from our website. And this is from 1990 through 2016, a compilation of the cases. So the darker the color, the more cases there were in that particular state over that time. And you can see, of course, New York is in the darkest range there. And then this is a graph that we do. Again, you can use it for educational purposes, whatever, but it will show you that this was 2016, and this features the top 15 states. And it's Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York in that order. And people will say, well, wait a minute, I thought New York was first. Well, New York used to be first. And on a piece of paper, you're no longer first. Well, what do I mean about that? Well, that means New York State has 27 counties that no longer actually go through the process of going through the disease and deciding who has it and sending that off to the CDC. Instead, they summarize. They summarize and take a small segment of cases, and they validate those cases, and then they provide estimates to the CDC. Well, the problem with that is, with the reporting system out of the CDC, they're not allowed to accept estimates. So that means your state has a whole heck of a lot more Lyme disease, about twice the number of cases that are reported each year. So this used to be reported weekly in something called MMWR. What's that? Well, that's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. It's a great magazine. And if you're ever, have a dull day and you want to read something about infectious diseases, well, you can get that online. It's from the CDC. And they report basically these diseases across the country that are reportable. Now, wouldn't you think, folks, the fact that Lyme disease has now been considered an epidemic, finally, like 2 weeks ago, the CDC came out and said the last 20 years of Lyme have been epidemic. Well, I was thrilled. I'm 35 years. I could have told them this at least 30 years ago anyway. So the bottom line is that no longer are the Lyme numbers going to be published in here. They'll be published at the end of each year, but they're not going to be published weekly, which means if people are trying to determine on some kind of regular basis for whatever reason, all the other diseases remain the same. They're all published, all these other diseases that have a whole lot less of cases. I don't know what to tell you about that, but in 2009, the CDC said that the Lyme incidence was higher than that of HIV, and it was the 7th highest incidence in the US. In 2016, they said it was the most common vector-borne disease reported and 6th most common of all nationally notifiable. And in 2018, they said that the reported cases of tick-borne disease more than doubled over the last 13-year period. So tick-borne diseases made up 77% of all vector-borne diseases. So what does that mean? That means mosquito, ticks, and fleas. So out of all of those diseases in the US, Lyme made up 77% of those across time. And it made up Lyme made up 82% of all tick-borne diseases, and you'll see there are now 20 in our country, which I'm going to talk to you about. A lot of them are here. Okay, and New York State was in the top 20% of states in disease cases reported from ticks. So this was the new report just out from the CDC, and this was disease cases from ticks, not just Lyme, but other ticks. And the top 20% are the dark blue, almost looking black, maybe they are black. Those states had the top 20%, and you can see that most of those states are in our region. Now, the highest cases by age traditionally have been 5 to 9 and 10 to 14. And unfortunately, and this is what makes me really sad, guys, age groups 0 to 4 years represent 5% of reported cases. And the LDA took some of the CDC stats, and we figured that from 2001 to 2010, that 30% of the cases were our children, ages 0 to 19. And the born and unborn are affected by Lyme, and you heard some of this earlier today. That means pregnant women can transmit Lyme to the fetus through the placenta, and it can cause birth defects and death of the fetus. So what about our pets? Well, dogs act as what's called sentinels. They're often diagnosed with Lyme before people are diagnosed and are 50% more likely to get Lyme than people. Well, the reasons, I believe, are dogs are kind of like our kids, you know? They go out and they run around. Don't do that, Bobby. Don't do that, Jim. Don't do this, you know, Sarah, whatever. And do your kids listen? Well, I don't know. I raised 3 of them, and I can honestly say they didn't always listen. And now I have 4 granddaughters, and they don't always listen. So anyway, the bottom line, the dogs are kind of like that because you let them out, they run around, they roll in the leaves. You definitely don't want anybody rolling in the leaves today. That's where the ticks are. So I also want to mention cats because I know we have a lot of cat owners, and myself included, and they've had some discussion, oh, cats can't get Lyme, cats can't do it again. Well, let me tell you, cats can get Lyme. And some of the newest studies are actually showing that pet owners have a high percent of increased risk of getting the disease if you're a pet owner. And the reason is because these pets bring in ticks that are not attached oftentimes, and those ticks can crawl off and crawl onto you. So now some of the latest research, unfortunately for you dog owners, is showing that we always knew that Lyme disease had a severe impact, some certain strains, on the kidneys of dogs. But now the latest study shows not only Lyme, but also another disease called ehrlichiosis, which also people can get. It comes from the same tick, and that they have a very high risk, greater than 300% risk of developing kidney disease when they found Ehrlichia antibodies in dogs and in endemic areas, which we're in, and a 43% increased risk with Borrelia burgdorferi, the Lyme disease spirochete. So our pets are greatly at risk for the disease. And I noticed that insurance, pet insurance was, which I thought was okay, pet insurance. When we had pets early on, we never had such a thing. They have it today, and maybe some people have it. The cases for Lyme, the amount of money is going up with pet insurance. That led me to something that I found out, that there's actually an insurance policy in Siberia for tick-borne disease, because they have something over there called TBE, tick-borne disease encephalitis. We don't have it here yet, but who knows? Anyway, I thought it was interesting that it costs about $5 for them to get the policy. If they're bitten by a tick within 3 days, they have to have the tick tested. If the tick is a carrier, they can go and get a free injection. And I said, well, why can't our government do something not like that, but something similar with tick-borne diseases? And I don't know if it'll ever come to pass. Anyway, the canine Lyme disease for 2017, this comes from the Companion Animal Parasite Council. In New York, 346,000 plus dogs were tested for Lyme disease. And out of that, 11% tested positive. That's 1 out of every 10 dogs in 2017. Now, just quickly, I want to mention this because there are other kinds of ticks that are really running havoc through our environment. And these ticks are called a Dermacentor albopictus, or the winter tick, and they're decimating the moose populations all up in further north. And in the winter of 2016, 80% of what they call collared calves, they were taking these calf mooses in New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont, and they were tracking them, and 80% of them died. And many of them die because why? Because they die of exsanguination. What does that mean? They bleed to death from the number of ticks that are on them. It's pretty unsightly and disgusting, and I feel so sad for those animals. So they scrape themselves against trees to get rid of these ticks, and their outer fur is removed, so now they call them ghost moose. because a lot of them almost appear white. And this, I don't know if you can see this one, but when I spoke out in Colorado a year or two ago about this, the guy ran up and showed me, this is the picture he took. He didn't know what the heck was the matter with this moose. Has all these white patches. So they have ghost moose in Colorado, where I'll be. I leave next Friday to go to Colorado to speak out there. This is the ear of a New Jersey black bear, with showing you these are black-legged ticks, which is the deer tick, and on the bottom ear, it shows you the ticks mating right on the ear of the bear. So now I've learned to love opossums, and the reason for that is I didn't particularly like opossums before this until I found out that they could eat about 5,000 and kill about 5,000 ticks a season. So I say we have to give those guys a cheer and do everything we can to keep them around. Now that doesn't mean that that's the only thing you should do is, bring in a couple of opossums, but it means if you live in a wooded area and you have them, be nice to them. So, okay, so a lot of people still don't really know how we get Lyme disease. So what are the significant players in Lyme? Well, we have a white-footed mouse in our area of the country, the chipmunk, the vole, the eastern gray squirrel, a bunch of different birds. These are the small mammals that the tick will bite them and pick up the disease from them. So if you have a lot of those critters running around your yard, this is problematic if they're up around near your home, because they're bringing those ticks up by your house. Now, other areas of the country, the West Coast, they have a western gray squirrel, the wood rat. Down south, they have a cotton mouse, a cotton rat. So everybody says, but wait a minute, I always thought this was about the deer. Well, basically, it isn't necessarily. The deer, and this is what I say when I speak in the schools to the kids, the deer is like the bus. The deer transports the ticks everywhere. And so usually the female will try to feed on the deer tick for its last meal, and oftentimes the ticks will actually mate on the deer. And then they fall to the ground, and then the female will lay the eggs. But that is the major role of the deer. It transports it around. So now, here's something you may or may not know, and all the years I've been in, I haven't been as worried about new stuff. This one worries me, folks. Okay, there's a new tick in New Jersey, and we all know and make jokes about, I'm from New Jersey, about what comes out of New Jersey. But this isn't our fault, people. Just remember that. Okay, this tick has come in from Asia. They don't have a clue how it was brought here. It was found in Hunterdon County, which, if those of you not familiar, very rural county with the highest sheep population in New Jersey, which I found out. I had no clue. Didn't know we had that many sheep, frankly. I live at the Jersey Shore. There are not too many sheep down there. There are a lot of ticks, but not a lot of sheep. So anyway, the basic bottom line is last year in 2017, they found a couple of ticks on this sheep. So the woman couldn't decide what they were. She'd never seen them. Took them to the health department or wherever, and the health department said, we don't know what these things are. So the long and short of it is they turned out to be these ticks called the longicornis tick, or commonly called the longhorn tick. And basically, what they did was they rushed out there, they checked around the whole property, they found over 1,000 ticks. So they went out there, they sprayed all kinds of good chemicals, I'm sure, or not so good chemicals, depending on how you look at it. And they said, well, this probably won't winter over. And I'm sitting at my office saying, I don't know how anyone could be that naive to believe that. The long and short of it is, here it is, 2018, and they just made the announcement that indeed that tick wintered over. And now they have found it 40 miles away in 2 places in Union County. So what does that mean? Well, this tick has a unique characteristic, and that is it can reproduce without a male. It does not need a male. So what happens is, this means if it's an invasive tick and it comes into your area, all you need is one female who lays thousands of eggs at a time, and you don't need any kind of fertilization. And usually these invasive ticks can establish what they call an established population very quickly for that reason. This is not good. Now, this tick over in Asia does a lot of damage to cattle and sheep and things like that, but it also has been known to carry human diseases and also diseases that affect pets. So right now, there's about 6, 7, 8, I don't know, agencies working on this furiously, and they're out there testing, and they're saying, well, we haven't found any tick-borne diseases in them. And I'm not going to tell you what my opinion on that is, but nonetheless, that is the longicornis tick. And the one that you see just the 2 on, that's the Ixodes scapularis nymph tick next to the longicornis nymph tick. So you can see the longicornis is a little bit bigger, but not that much bigger than the deer tick itself. And there they are again, the top going across are the deer tick, and the bottom 2 are the longicornis. Those longicornis are partially fed, meaning they had some kind of a feeding. Okay, I think Dr. Fallon showed you this map, or these 2, but you just look at the density of the colors on the bottom map, and that's the change from 1996 to 2015. You can see how much more deer ticks across the country there were, or are, I should say, since that time period. So this is the deer tick. Now, here we go. It transmits the following that we know about: Borrelia burgdorferi, Borrelia mayonii, Borrelia miyamotoi, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, bartonellosis or lichiosis, Powassan encephalitis virus, tick paralysis, and tularemia. Folks, I'm telling you, this is not good. So this means from one tick bite, you could get a combination of diseases, and some of you know that's called a co-infection. Makes the doctor's job doubly, triply, or more difficult to diagnose, because you could have any number of those. Now, that's the deer tick laying eggs, ovipositing. That's the stages of the deer tick. And you see that tiny little white thing right in the center, that's the larva. That's what hatches out of that big mass of eggs. And when it hatches out, it generally is not infected. So what that means is the disease doesn't pass from the egg, usually, into the larva. There's some studies that say some might, and again, I personally would like to see a lot more studies done, but so what happens, that larva bites the mouse that I told you about, or bites the squirrel or the chipmunk and picks it up. And then after it goes into its next stage, it bites you, your loved one, or your pet. So that's how it happens. Now, you always hear about poppy seed-sized ticks causing Lyme. That in the center are the poppy seed-sized ticks. And I'm sorry, the bottom ones are the ticks, and the center are the actual poppy seeds. And you can see how small those really are. Obviously, these are blown up, so you can see them. This is thanks to Bob Lane in California. This is the Ixodes pacificus, the cousin of Ixodes scapularis, the western black-legged tick, and that transmits Borrelia burgdorferi, Borrelia mayomotoi, and Anaplasma phagocytophilum. So again, a lot of disease in ticks. All right, now this tick you need to know about, and I'll bet there's not many people that really know the magnitude of it right now. Okay, this is called the Lone Star tick, and this map actually, this is a CDC map. It's probably a bit out of date. The Lone Star tick is pushing further north. And when I started, actually, well, I started 35 years ago, but probably about somewhere in there in between 25 years ago, that Lone Star tick was only as far north as where I live at the Jersey Shore. Now it's all the way up to, we give it to Paula Jackson Jones up in Maine because I knew, we don't all want it. Let's send it up there. So now it's found in Maine. It's also found now as far north as just entering Minnesota. And it is not a nice tick, folks. Whoops, wrong direction here. Okay, that is the Lone Star tick, and the female has that white dot. The male does not, and usually the small one does not either, the nymph. But I actually have seen a nymph that had one, but generally they don't. So the Lone Star tick can carry tick paralysis, Q fever, tularemia, heartland virus, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and Ehrlichia chafiensis. Now these, again, one tick bite could conceivably, depending on where you are in the country, give you one or more of these diseases. And the problem is, I missed star eye, one of the most important ones. Star eye is called Southern Tick Associated Rash Illness. It looks like Lyme. It acts like Lyme. It's treated like Lyme, but there's no tests for it. And good heavens, all these years later, we have all this magnificent technology. We don't know what the organism is that causes star eye. For a while, they had one that they said did, but then they decided it really didn't. So therefore, the reason this is so important, folks, is if you get bitten by a Lone Star tick, you may go to your doctor, and the doctor may say, well, you don't have to worry. That tick is a Lone Star tick. Well, you do have to worry, because in our area of the country, probably most of those, except for our heartland virus, I haven't heard here yet. But the rest of those you can all get here, especially Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is very deadly disease. Okay, that's the Lone Star tick. Again, thousands of eggs. And okay, this is the American dog tick. Not the same as the common brown dog tick, which you might see on your animals, and I'll talk about that in a moment. You can see where the American dog tick is, and my little note that says, tick is now in Colorado. That's because I'm speaking in Colorado. I don't want them to think because it's not on the map, but that's a CDC map, and that's what they have. Okay, this is what the dog tick looks like. It's quite a bit bigger than the deer tick, and it can give you tularemia, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or something called tick paralysis, which I mentioned. Now, tick paralysis is an interesting thing. It's not a disease per se, it's an actual toxin that the tick has. So if you get bitten by this tick, what can happen is you can get paralyzed. It begins from the feet and it works its way upward, and you can become paralyzed. And there's only one thing you can do about it, one thing, and it's not taking a medication. It's removing that tick. Now, if someone doesn't know they've been bitten and no one looks for that, you will continue to get paralyzed, and I guess theoretically at least you could die, because the reaction just continues and continues. So it has to be pulled off. A lot of doctors are not familiar with tick paralysis. They don't think we have it here. We actually do. And that's, again, the American dog tick. One of the bad things about the American dog tick is that the larva, remember I mentioned that with the deer tick, it hatches and it's not infected. Well, sometimes these guys hatch and they actually have Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Now, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, untreated, has a pretty high fatality rate. I think it's around 10% or so. And basically, it's particularly hard hits children under the age of 10. So it's something to be concerned about. And I heard a story that broke my heart, and this was just recently, from a father in, I think it was either Indiana or Illinois. And basically, he told me the story of his 5-year-old daughter who was very sick. She was hospitalized, I think 9, 11 days. And the bottom line is, everyone said, you have to get her tested. She's got Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They refused. They said, oh, well, there's no Rocky Mountain spotted fever here. Well, folks, there is. And the child died. And it was an excruciating death. I had tears in my eyes, and I couldn't believe the story that no one would test that child. And they refused, they wouldn't treat the child. And it's horrifying, some of the things that have happened, because no one wants to believe these tick-borne diseases are here. So if you wondered why I'm telling you about these things, this is why I'm telling you. I don't expect people to remember them. I'm not going to give you a test. But in the back of your mind, you're going to say, well, wait a minute, I should look it up. Maybe that, is this tick-borne disease, and maybe we can save somebody's life. And that's what we have to do. That's what I've been doing for many years. That's the American dog tick on the end of the paper clip, and the little deer ticks inside, so you get to see how big that dog tick is. And again, we have all these pictures on our website. Feel free to download them. This is the Rocky Mountain wood tick. If you decide you're going to travel out to the west, and that has a bunch of different diseases: Colorado tick fever, Rocky Mountain spotted, Q fever, tularemia, and again, tick paralysis. Tick-borne relapsing fever. This is a very interesting disease. Currently, at least, it's found mostly in the West. And this is what's called a soft-bodied tick, which was something new to me that I had to learn a couple of years ago. When you talk in Colorado, you got to know what's living out there. And so the ticks we have here are hard-bodied ticks. This is soft bodies. These suckers live for 10 years or more. And what they do is they live inside animal burrows. And so they're often found if people go and you vacation and you go in you have a cabin or something like that in the woods. These things live in the burrows. They come out and they feed, and they can give you tick-borne relapsing fever. And so it really bothered me when I saw that they lived 10 years. I was like, oh, my worst nightmare come true, right? So anyway, this, in case you think, well, I'm going to go to Florida, or Mississippi or Texas or so, they don't have any of these things. Well, I hate to tell you, but they do. This is the Amblyomma maculatum, the Gulf Coast tick. And that can give you something called Rickettsia parkeri rickettsioses, which is similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. That's the tick. So this is Rhephisophilus sanguineus. This is the brown dog tick. Now, when I started, everyone in public health said, don't worry about the brown dog tick. It doesn't transmit diseases to humans. Don't worry about it. Well, guess what? It is now being found that it does transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever to people. And it's especially happening, at least at the moment, on a number of Indian reservations down in the Southwest. But it could happen anywhere, because if it's biting people and it's capable of transmitting, which they now say that it is, this could happen. So that's the brown dog tick. Okay. Oh, I wanted to say one other thing important about the brown dog tick, because it's happened to people in our region. If you ever get a tick infestation, and people have called me, my house is infected with deer ticks. No. Deer ticks and all those other ticks, they don't stay in your home. They really can't. I'm not going to say they won't be there for a short period of time, but you won't get an infestation because the climatic conditions in there just don't work for them. But the brown dog tick, on the other hand, can infest your house, and you may need to get an exterminator to get it out. So how did the ticks get on us? Well, basically, ticks climb up small plants, grass, and then you brush against them, or your animal brushes against them. And that's called questing. And then they get on you. And that tick, like the deer tick, is called a passive feeder. Because it really isn't seeking you out. It's just kind of hanging around waiting for lunch to come by, right? So the Lone Star tick, which you remember I mentioned to you, star eye and several other diseases, and actually one I make sure I mention later, the alpha-gal meat allergy. But the Lone Star ticks are active feeders. They will come after you. If you're the tick guys I work with tell me that when they go out in the woods, that they don't even want to put their paperwork down because the ticks will come out and crawl all over them. And they are fast. Well, what does that mean? Fast is a relative term. They're fast for ticks. They're pretty fast moving. I once worked with a guy who did nothing but take photographs of ticks. I personally told him I'd get another job if that were mine. But he told me the story of having these ticks in his refrigerator, and he said that he had Lone Stars in the refrigerator, and he had to set up the chute, and so he took the Lone Stars out, and he said within just a couple, I don't know how many seconds it was, under a minute anyway, they started crawling all up and down his arms. So it was at that point that I said to my husband, who's sitting back there and is an avid fisherman, listen, you brought me eels, you brought me all kinds of bait. You've put all those things freezing in my refrigerator in my great cookie cans. I open up, I think they're cookies, and I take them out and they're eels frozen. But if you ever bring me ticks and put them in my refrigerator, I said, it's all over. That's it. We're done. So he hasn't yet, but, one never can tell. So anyway, but seriously, these are the things that we have to know about these creatures, because some people don't know what they look like or their behaviors. And if you know, you're protected. Education is always the key to all of these. Okay, so now this is something that you definitely need to know, because this is a controversial area, and in my opinion, incorrect information has been given out by both the government and also the doctors and other institutions, I'll say, over time. And that is, what is tick attachment time? What does it mean, and how do they come up with these numbers? Now, over the time I've been involved, I've heard 72 hours, 40 hours, 25 hours, that the tick has to be attached before you get the disease. Well, folks, it isn't that simple. Now, those numbers were based on the following concept. In many ticks, the bacteria is in the midgut of the tick. The midgut is like the stomach of the tick. So it's in the midgut, the tick bites you, and then all that stuff in it has to migrate up into its salivary glands, which just like you have salivary glands in your mouth, right? And so then that's when it goes. Well, that takes a period of time for that migration to happen. But we know, and a lot of researchers know, that ticks can have incomplete feedings. They can take a bite of something, maybe they thought it was a steak and it turns out to be a pork roast, I don't know, but they don't like it, whatever the reason. So anyway, they start feeding, and that migration has started. They drop off. Now they want to go find their steak that they really wanted, and they bite whatever it is, and then the migration has started, and it may be in the salivary glands. Now, there are papers showing that this can happen I've seen papers 5 hours, 12 hours, whatever. But you should know that if someone says to you, oh, well, you couldn't know, how long have you had that on you? No, you couldn't get Lyme disease. Well, I am not a physician. So please rest assured, I can't give you that kind of advice. I can only tell you that in the literature, there are cases shown. Our treating physicians have seen cases where people have been bitten, its attachment has been a lot less time, and that they've gotten the disease. So, and different diseases have different levels of that, different time levels. So how does the tick feed? It cuts you open. Then it sticks a hollow, barbed hypostome in you, and it secretes a glue-like substance to cement itself to you. Then it sucks your blood, and sometimes it secretes blood thinners and immune regulators into you. And during feeding, organisms in the tick flow inside you. Sounds very exciting, right? So that is, you see that barbed thing in the center? That is what gets stuck in you. Not a very pleasant experience, right? This is probably one of the most important things I'm going to tell you today. Proper tick removal. We still have, unfortunately, medical people that are improperly removing ticks. Okay, don't put anything on the tick. Don't burn it. Don't touch the tick with your fingers. Don't squeeze the tick. If you're using pointed tweezers, you go close to the skin on the head end of the tick and pull straight out. Don't twist it, don't squeeze it, don't put the tweezers on its body because it can inject. If you squeeze that, whatever it has in it can be injected into you, and it greatly increases your risk of infection. Clean the skin area with antiseptic afterwards, and you can save the tick for testing if you choose at testing labs. And also disposal, if you want to dispose of it, stick the tick in tape for disposal. That's how I do. And duct tape happens to be my favorite tape. I kind of use it for everything, as everyone in my family knows. Oh God, what is mom doing again with the duct tape? But anyway, I just love that tape, and I figure, well, this thing is never going to get out of that alive. And so anyway, also as far as the testing, people will often ask, well, should I have my tick tested? Well, I can't give you that kind of assurance. The downside is yes, you can have your tick tested. You can have it tested for many different organisms now. So, but there's a time lag. So if you get bitten by a tick, you're going to have to wait whatever period of time it takes for whatever test to get back. And if you don't test for every organism, you're not sure that that's going to happen, that it's going to be free and clear. But again, is it a bad thing to do? No, I could never say it's a bad thing to do, but you should probably always save the tick to show it to your physician. And get it noted into the record and get a picture of it. Just like if you get a rash, you should always get a picture of it in your record. So co-infections, I already mentioned that. That means one bite, many different diseases. And I think it was Dr. Fallon showed this guy. I got permission to get this picture, the Iceman Ötzi. And again, he was preserved for 5,300 years in ice. And when they did autopsies and so on him, they found the genetic footprint of the Borrelia burgdorferi in his DNA, making the Iceman the earliest known human infected by the bug that caused Lyme disease. He didn't die from it. Don't ask me how they make these determinations, but I think he had some arrow or hatchet or some such thing. But anyway, okay. So this slide I call Lyme disease that you know, Borrelia burgdorferi. Why do I say that? Well, I'm going to tell you in a minute. So this is, of course, transmitted by the black-legged deer tick, and the early symptoms are flu-like illness, muscle aches and pains, joint pain and or swelling, fatigue, malaise, fever, headache, a possible rash. That's what I need to talk about. Again, probably less than 50% of people will get what's called a bullseye rash. There's a big confusion about rashes. Bullseye rash has a very narrow definition. If you have a bullseye rash, and I'm going to show you in a minute, that means you have a central clearing inside. If you don't have that central clearing, that can be called an EM rash, but it isn't a true bullseye rash. So that's why you'll see, well, this percent has rash, this percent has this rash, this rash. We just say that less than 50% of people probably know about it.
Hold the mic down a little bit.
Down?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, okay, these are some Lyme rashes. You can see them. That one is a bullseye rash, the one on the right. I don't know where that pointer is, Corey. It's not there? So anyway, the one with the central clearing is a bullseye rash. Okay, these are typical and atypical images of the Lyme rash, and you can download this poster. We gave Brian Fallon at Columbia some monies to produce it, and we give it out at all our medical conferences because physicians still cannot necessarily, some of them do, but a lot of them still don't recognize the rashes. There are many different kinds of rashes. Okay, so signs and symptoms. I'm not going to go through all these. They're in our Lyme primer that you can find in the back. But I will say that Lyme can hit any system in the body. You can get musculoskeletal, reproductive, cardiac, pulmonary, neurological, neuropsychiatric, which you heard a lot about. Gastrointestinal, I want to mention, because doctors don't always realize that, yes, Lyme disease can be in the gastrointestinal tract. There have been research studies done on that. They're difficult to find, but they are out there. The LDA has funded some over time, and then there's some other general symptoms. Now, this is Lyme disease you don't know. What do I mean by that? Well, a couple of years ago, a new strain of Lyme was founded, I'll say, Borrelia miyamotoi-Lymelike, and it's only currently the Midwest and a little band coming further eastward. And basically, it's a different bacteria. It causes Lyme symptoms, but the differences from the Lyme we do know, there may be nausea and vomiting. The rashes are much more diffuse. And Lyme disease hardly has any bacteria in the blood, and I think you heard that this morning. It's not found there very often, and it's usually a small amount, whereas this has a much higher concentration of bacteria in the blood. So this is a CDC map of all the different tick-borne diseases that they decided to look at, and it just shows you, the different colors are different tick-borne diseases, and sometimes it's good to see. This is the case reports by the CDC, and they report some of the other tick-borne disease. They don't report all of them. That is Borrelia miyamotoi. This is a bacteria that now we know is a lot in our region. The deer ticks can be infected by this. It's more like a relapsing fever, but it's similar to Lyme, but it's also similar to relapsing fever group of Borrelia. And again, you can get it, the same tick bite. There is now testing for it. Up until about a year and a half ago, there was no commercial testing for it, and now Immunogen, the Mayo Clinic, Quest, and maybe others have testing for miyamotoi. This is babesiosis. You need to know about it, folks. In our area of the country, it's probably one of the diseases that you most often will, or doctors will most often find with the Lyme disease bacteria. And so anyway, that's also transmitted, obviously, by the deer tick. Those without spleens and the elderly are a higher risk for serious infection. It can have a fairly high fatality rate in that group. There are tests for it, and there are treatments which are not necessarily the same as for Lyme disease. Now, all these years we have known, or at least decades, we have known that Babesia can be passed through the blood supply in our country. However, they never screened for it. So they had all these people that were getting Babesia through the blood supply, and there was no screening. Finally, the FDA just recently approved a test to screen for one of the strains of Babesia microti. And so, not a good thing. Anyway, okay, this is actually something interesting that was found in the Dominican Republic. It's a tick inside amber. Amber is kind of a fossilized tree resin, and it was 15 to 45 million years old. And again, I often wonder how they determine that, but I have some idea. So anyway, the arrows show where the tick was removed off an animal. They think it was a monkey. But the bottom line is, what did they find when they split this open, and then they got the tick out and they examined the contents of a tick, and they found a kind of a precursor, a relative to Babesia in this tick. So we know that Babesia was at least 15 to 45 million years old. So as one of the docs mentioned this morning, these diseases have been around a long time, folks. They're powerful, very, very powerful. So now this is Bartonellosis, which is caused by Bartonella. Now, this is a controversial area. Well, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to our treating physicians, they don't think it's controversial at all, or our patients. If you talk to the CDC and the NIH, they're still not convinced that Bartonella is being transmitted by ticks. They now admit, after several studies, that yes, Bartonella can be found in ticks, but they're not admitting yet, the evidence isn't conclusive enough for them, that it's being transmitted. However, our doctors are finding a lot of cases of Bartonella with Lyme disease, patients getting Lyme disease and Bartonella. And you may have heard in the past of Bartonellosis, they called it cat scratch fever because you can get it from fleas on cats. So the CDC wants to be cautious, and they don't want to say yet that it's transmitted. But I kind of think we're beyond that, but that's their decision to make. Okay, this is southern tick-associated rash illness. I mentioned about that to you. That looks like Lyme, acts like Lyme. You treat it like Lyme, but there's no test for it, and they have no idea what causes it. Now, this is important because this is something spreading rapidly, not just in our country, but now in other places around the world. The alpha-gal allergy for eating meat. So what happens is if you get bitten by a Lone Star tick, you can develop this allergy, which will now prevent you from eating meat. And in a lot of the cases, you cannot even eat any meat products that are made, and people are having a terrible time. Their lives are being totally turned around because they can have nothing to do with red meat, and it's massively a problem. And the symptoms can come on from usually 4+ hours after exposure. People can go into what's called anaphylactic shock, which means basically your system starts this severe allergic reaction, which has to be dealt with. And if your allergist doesn't know what's causing it, doesn't know where to go, well, he's not going to realize this. So we need to get that message out. So if you're bitten by a Lone Star tick, you can get a lot of nasty things that aren't necessarily known about. And again, this is at our conference that we're having with Columbia it's going to be in Providence, Rhode Island in October. We are having one of the premier speakers who is working on the allergy. So I look forward to the new information. Q fever, that can be transmitted, Lone Star, Rocky Mountain wood ticks. Again, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I always tell people, don't be confused by the name. They love to call these things Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So wouldn't you think that it would all be in the Rocky Mountains? Well, that is not true. Actually, a good percent, and I think more than half, is not in the Rocky Mountains. It's the same as star eye, southern tick-associated rash illness. Well, guess what? Again, the tick is as far north as Maine and Minnesota. It's no longer southern. So the names can sometimes prejudice people from even looking at those diseases. So that's the Rocky Mountain spotted fever disease map, and the darker the color, the more Rocky Mountain spotted fever is in that state. Okay, the rickettsia, that's the one that's around the Gulf Coast. This disease is on the West Coast, Rickettsia species 36D, which has now been renamed Rickettsia philippi in California only, at least at the moment. Anaplasmosis. This is a disease we have here. It's on the rise, not just in humans, but in dogs. And so again, you can get it as a co-infection. There are treatments and there are blood tests for it. Ehrlichiosis is now being found in a couple different kinds of ticks, and it's now being found a pretty good percent of the country. And it definitely needs to get treatment. It can be really serious without treatment. Tularemia is not as prevalent as some of the other diseases, and it can be transmitted by touching infected animals, contaminated water, contaminated aerosols, or agricultural dust, or it also can be a bioterrorism agent, which I always found to be interesting, if nothing else. But anyway, there are some cases in the Northeast. They're not very often. This is one you need to know about, folks, if you don't. Powassan virus. Okay, Powassan virus is something that's been around for a number of years, but the cases are increasing. And the problem with Powassan virus is it has a relatively high fatality rate. There can be 10% of the cases of people who have encephalitis from it can die from it. And unfortunately, the survivors, 50% of them have severe neurologic complications, which to my understanding don't go away. It's very serious. It's found in the deer tick, and it's very problematic. There's I'll call two versions of it, and one is Powassan virus, and one is called the deer tick virus. But anyway, basically, it produces Powassan virus disease. Heartland virus hasn't found its way here yet. It is in the Midwest, and it was only discovered in 2009, and now it's already in one state. It's now in Missouri, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, North Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, and Indiana. You see how fast that went, folks? Now, perhaps they didn't know that it was there originally, and maybe it was. Bourbon virus. Now, this is not, don't think about sitting around the table and having an after-dinner bourbon. This isn't that. Bourbon is the name of a county in Kansas, and I can only tell you that because we lived there several years when my husband was in the Army. My first daughter was born there. But anyway, this is a new one, and the first case was in Kansas in 2014. They had a second case in Oklahoma in 2015. They've also found it in a study of ticks where they tested over 39,000 ticks. They did find it there. So far, there have been no other tests. One case, the patient survived, and I believe the first patient died. These viral diseases are serious because they have no treatment. Powassan virus, no treatment. Bourbon virus, Heartland virus, no treatment. You can get what they call palliative care, where they help you along and they help your body with symptoms and so on, but there's no treatment for these viruses. Colorado tick fever, again, that's a virus in Colorado. Tick-borne relapsing fever, that's the tick that can live 10 years. Tick paralysis, I told you about that. It starts at the feet, works its way up. Have to remove the tick. So what's the story of the Lyme disease vaccine? You heard it mentioned this morning. So basically what happened is there was a vaccine on the market, and it was there was a big war, if you will, as there is with everything about Lyme disease, about what really happened. And at the time, we heard that about 30% of humans were actually had almost like an allergy to the base of the vaccine. The base of the vaccine is something called the outer surface protein A of the bacteria, and sometimes your own tissue would get attacked. And so these people would develop an autoimmune arthritis, which apparently appeared to be uncurable. I don't know long-term what those people are doing today. But anyway, it was very problematic, and no one wanted to hear about it. And so patients did a class action against it. Doctors were stopping giving it. Our organization was involved. We went down and testified twice before the FDA because we're all these people. I could not, during that time period, I was going around the country, I couldn't go anywhere and talk about Lyme disease. I had to talk about the vaccine because these people were hearing the stories and the people were getting vaccine and they were having problems and so on and so forth. So it was a big war. And so our organization actually met with the FDA. We had a private meeting. We went down. We took a volunteer consultant from another company who had the same vaccine platform, but they had withdrawn their vaccine from the market because before it actually went out full swing after it was tested, because they said there were too many problems. And he told the FDA, these were the problems with this vaccine. Of course, the FDA didn't really want us there, but it's a long story, but I'm not going to get into it. But anyway, we were there. So the bottom line is eventually the company that manufactured Lyme-Rix they removed the vaccine from the market, citing poor sales. And it's unfortunate that patients, treating physicians, and advocacy groups got blamed for that removal. Rather than looking at the base of the problem to see what it was, we kind of got smeared in the process. And now there's a new vaccine being tested. It's already finished its first phase. It's from Valneva, which is a French company. So remember I mentioned the first vaccine had OspA, outer surface protein A, from the bacteria. Well, this one has 6 OspAs, 6 different OspAs, some from the US and some from Europe. And they've indicated that they have removed a little segment of the OspA. And they said, well, now this isn't going to do this again. Well, we've been trying to get the science on all of this and the information, and right now it's pretty difficult to get a hold of. So the FDA has fast-tracked the vaccine, and it's something that do we need a vaccine? Yes, a vaccine is certainly needed. We need a safe and effective vaccine. Will this one prove out? I don't know. We don't have, I don't believe I've seen enough information yet. I'm anxious to see what's going to happen on that. So I think it was Bob Bransfield that mentioned this morning the misuse of the CDC criteria. This has been big, folks, and probably many of you in here have experienced it. Basically, the CDC has what's called a surveillance criteria. That defines the disease. It defines it in a very narrow way. If you fit this tiny, narrow criteria, you're considered to have the disease for surveillance purposes, and that's it. It's not supposed to be diagnostic. Well, guess what? The physicians and also insurance companies and others have used this as a diagnostic definition for years. It is why many of our patients across this country have been able to not be able to get diagnosed, not be able to get treated, and not be able to have their insurance pay if they do get diagnosed and treated. And it is something we're working on in Washington. And I would say at this point, I have been a member of the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group in Washington, D.C. As of last December. I got my appointment. I'm one of, there are 14 people, there are 7 public, and I'm one of those public members. And I will say that I am not here to speak as a working group member or for the working group or for HHS. I'm here speaking for the Lyme Disease Association. So anyway, this is a real problem. I mentioned the rashes, the case definitions, and all the stuff that affect that. Now, for late-stage Lyme disease, when neurologic and/or arthralgic symptomology was present, the false negative rate for the 2-tier, that's a 2-tier test that now is required for Lyme disease, was 55.7%. Generating over 500 times more false negatives than the 2-stage HIV test. So here you have HIV, 2-step works great. Here you have Lyme disease, the 2-step does not work. This is very problematic. It's something that we're looking to change. So that's basically the controversy. I'm not going to get into all that. But there are 2 separate guidelines. Bob, I think, alluded to it this morning. And the IDSA guidelines basically say you can only have a few weeks of treatment. And after that treatment, what happens is they may tell you need to see a psychiatrist. Maybe, depending on if you have neurologic disease or something, they may say, well, you can have one more course. But after that, basically, no treatment for you. So the ILADS guidelines are different. The ILADS guidelines are basically something that the docs can actually look at them and make a determination based on their best clinical judgment as to whether you need further treatment. Now, the sad part is the National Guidelines Clearinghouse, which is under the auspices of the federal government, where the guidelines are, and ILADS has their guidelines there now, IDSA does not, that is actually going out of business, so to speak, because the government funding was cut, and they're cutting it as of June or July, I think, of this year. There's a couple of things that have happened at the federal level. Lyme research, we were successful in getting it into what's called CDMRP, which is really the Department of Defense funds, and we've gotten $5 million each year for the last couple of years. I sit on that panel. I have to travel down to Fort Detrick, my favorite place to go, it's every year, to look over what kinds of grants come in for that. Now, in 2016? Yeah, 2016, we were successful, and I was very involved in this, and I actually did the final negotiations for the wording of the bill that went into the 21st Century Cures Act that's now in law that created the HHS Tick-Borne Disease Working Group that I mentioned. So we do meet. In fact, we actually have a meeting down there next Tuesday and Wednesday. And Thursday of this past week, we just had a big nationwide webinar that lasted. We were on the phone from 8 o'clock in the morning till 6:45 at night. So we do a lot of work, folks, in trying to get this resolved. The House Lyme Disease Caucus, if your congressman isn't on this list, and you can find it on our website, you should certainly be getting them on it, because the caucus is a group of congressmen who support tick-borne diseases. There's been several bits of state legislation in the New York Senate. March 28th, a law was passed. It's been delivered to the Assembly, but it hasn't been passed into law. And this would require the Office of Mental Hygiene and the Department of Health in New York to conduct an impact study how infectious diseases such as Lyme and tick-borne diseases may correlate with mental health issues, just what Bob Bransfield was talking about this morning. And also, your New York State budget included $1 million dedicated to research and prevention of Lyme disease. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Woodbury, New York, with Senator Chuck Schumer, who's also the U.S. Senate Minority Leader, on a press conference on Lyme disease. Senator Schumer has had Lyme in the past, and I've been on a number of his conferences, press conferences over time. So getting rid of the ticks, this is my favorite tick picture. I love this tick picture. It's a fungus surrounding this tick, and this product is actually for sale. We don't promote products, but I'm sorry, I just love that tick encased in that, because obviously it can't go anywhere and it dies. And these products are used outside in your property. And I just want to say the Consumers Report just came out with this a week or so ago. They've tested natural repellents used on mosquitoes and said they don't work, or work 1 hour or less, on the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is causing Zika, yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, excuse me. So this raises doubts by a lot of our tick researchers whether these same products which they use in the repellents are really effective, and these are natural products. So you might want to look on Consumers Report to see that. And I thank you very much. I thank Bob and the Lyme Society, speakers and the sponsors and the audience.